Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we are stepping into the calm, steady world of cedar. Cedar is one of those rare things in nature that people seem to recognize in more than one way at once. Some know it as a tree rising dark and green against the pale sky. Some know it as wood in an old chest, a closet, a fence, or the walls of a quiet cabin. And some know it first through scent alone. Dry, clean, warm, and gently earthy. A smell that can feel both fresh and ancient at the same time. There is something deeply restful about cedar. It does not usually demand attention the way bright flowers or dramatic landscapes do. It is quieter than that, more patient. Cedar tends to arrive slowly in the senses, first through shape, then through texture, then through fragrance. And once it is noticed, it often stays with us. A tree, a material, and a scent, all held together by one name. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. The quiet continues here, just as it is. Part of what makes cedar so memorable is that its scent is not there by accident. That soft, woody fragrance began as part of the tree's own way of protecting itself. Cedar makes natural aromatic compounds that help defend it against insects, decay, and the slow damage caused by fungi and moisture. What smells comforting to us began as a survival tool for the tree. In a calm and quiet way, cedar has been making its own shield all along. That idea alone gives cedar a different kind of presence. It is not just beautiful, it is built with care. The fragrance in cedar is part of the living logic of the tree. It helps the wood last. It helps the tree endure. And even after the tree has become boards, panels, boxes, or beams, some of that protective character remains. The scent still rises from the wood, as if the tree has not fully let go of itself. Cedar is also a tree tied to time. Some cedar trees can live for many hundreds of years, and in certain conditions even longer. That means a cedar can stand through generations of weather, through changing seasons, through the passing of people, buildings, and roads, while continuing its slow upward growth. It is not hard to see why a long-lived tree like that would begin to feel meaningful to the human mind. A thing that lasts often begins to feel wise, even when it is silent. And cedar becomes even more interesting when we realize that not every tree called cedar is a true cedar in the strict botanical sense. The name has been given to several trees in different parts of the world, often because they share a similar scent, durability, or appearance. So cedar is both specific and broad. It is a real group of trees, but also a larger human tradition. A name we kept returning to whenever a tree felt close to that same dry, resinous, enduring character. That makes cedar a beautiful subject for a slow night like this one. It gives us many paths to follow. We can look at cedar as a living evergreen, holding its color through the year. We can look at cedar as wood that resists rot and holds its fragrance. We can look at cedar as part of homes, temples, storage chests, mountain forests, and memory itself. And through all of those forms, something stays the same. Cedar keeps offering a feeling of steadiness. So tonight, As the world grows quieter around you, we will stay close to that feeling. We will move through the tree, the wood, and the scent, and let each one reveal a little more about why cedar has remained so present in human life for so long. For now, it is enough simply to notice how much is already contained in the name. A tree, a material, a fragrance, a form of protection, a record of time, a quiet presence that has been living beside people for centuries, asking for almost nothing, while leaving a deep impression all the same. That quiet presence begins with something most people notice before they understand it. The scent of cedar feels calm to the human mind. It can seem clean, dry, warm, and almost softly smoky, depending on the kind of cedar and the age of the wood. Some people connect it with old chests, quiet closets, pencil shavings, wooden cabins, or outdoor air after sun has warmed a fence or deck. But for the tree itself, that smell did not begin as a gift for human memory. It began as part of the tree's own defense. Cedar produces natural aromatic compounds inside its wood, bark, and leaves. These compounds are part of the tree's chemistry, and they help protect it from the slow damage that threatens any living tree over time. Insects are drawn to wood. Fungi break down plant tissue. Moisture can invite rot. A tree that lives for many decades or even centuries needs ways to endure all of that. Cedar answers with structure, toughness, and scent. That is one of the loveliest things about cedar. Its fragrance is not decoration. It is function made beautiful. The compounds inside cedar help make the wood less inviting to certain insects and more resistant to decay than many other kinds of wood. This does not mean cedar is indestructible. No tree is. Time, weather, water, and living things eventually leave their mark on almost anything in the natural world. But cedar has a remarkable way of slowing that process. It protects itself not with speed or movement, but with patience and chemistry. That chemistry is part of why cedar can remain recognizable even after the tree has been cut and shaped into something else. A cedar board still carries the scent. A cedar chest still releases it when opened. A cedar closet can hold it for years. The tree is no longer growing, but some part of its protective system remains present in the wood, like an echo of the living cedar still resting inside the grain. The smell often becomes strongest when cedar is freshly cut, sanded, warmed by the sun, or enclosed in a still space. That is because the aromatic compounds are being released more actively into the air. A board in a lumber shop, a newly opened cedar box, even a handful of cedar shavings can suddenly fill the space around them. It is a gentle reminder that wood is not as silent as it first seems. Even after harvest, it still speaks through scent. This also helps explain why cedar feels different from many other woods. Some woods are valued for hardness, some for color, some for flexibility or weight. Cedar is often loved, not only for how it looks or lasts, but for the atmosphere it creates. It changes the air around it. It adds something invisible, but deeply noticeable. And human beings respond strongly to scent. Smell reaches the brain in a direct and powerful way, often stirring memory before thought has time to organize itself. That is one reason cedar can feel so immediate. A person may not know what kind of tree they are smelling. They may not know the science behind the fragrance, but the scent still lands somewhere deep and familiar. It can feel grounding, even when the source is not fully seen. In that way, cedar lives in two worlds at once. For the tree, the fragrance is part of survival. For us, it often becomes part of experience. The same compounds that help the tree endure become part of the quiet emotional tone that cedar creates in human life. Protection on one side, comfort on the other. And perhaps that is why cedar so often feels calm without feeling weak. Its stillness is not emptiness. Its softness is not fragility. The tree is carrying defenses inside its fibers the whole time, hidden in scent, hidden in grain, hidden in the slow logic of how it lives. So before cedar becomes a beam, a chest, a forest path, or a memory, it is already doing something deeply practical and deeply elegant at once. It is guarding itself in the most quiet way possible, by filling its own body with a fragrance that tells a story of endurance long before anyone stops to listen closely enough to hear it. That story of endurance becomes even more interesting when we look a little more closely at the name itself. Cedar sounds simple. It feels like the sort of word that should point to one clear thing. A single kind of tree, easy to identify, easy to place. But cedar turns out to be one of those names where human habit and botanical truth do not line up perfectly. The word has been used with affection, familiarity, and usefulness for a long time. And because of that, it has spread wider than science would draw its borders. In the strict botanical sense, true cedars belong to a group called cedrus. These are large evergreen conifers, trees with needle-like leaves and woody cones, and they are native to places such as the Mediterranean region and the Himalayas. They are the cedars that botanists would point to first when using the name in its most exact form. And yet, many of the trees people know as cedar are not part of that true cedar group at all. Western red cedar, eastern red cedar, incense cedar, and several other well-known trees called cedar belong to different branches of the conifer world. Some are more closely related to cypress or juniper than to true cedar. They earned the name because something about them felt cedar-like to the people who encountered them. Sometimes it was the scent. Sometimes it was the durability of the wood. Sometimes it was the look of the tree itself, evergreen, rugged, useful, and long-lasting. This kind of naming happens often in human life. People do not always begin with classification. They begin with experience. A tree smells familiar. Its wood behaves in a similar way. Its presence in the landscape reminds them of something already known. So the old name is carried forward and placed onto the new tree. Over time, the name stays, even when the deeper family history turns out to be different. That means cedar is both a precise word and a broad one. It is precise when speaking botanically about true cedars of the cedrus group. But it is broad in everyday life, where cedar can mean a larger tradition of fragrant, durable, evergreen trees whose wood and scent have shaped human experience in similar ways. And for a calm journey like this one, that broader sense is part of what makes cedar so rich. It allows us to follow not just a narrow scientific label, but the full path of how people have lived with cedar as a real presence in forests, homes, storage spaces, rituals, and memory. This wider use of the word also helps explain why cedar can feel so familiar across very different settings. A person might think of mountain slopes in Lebanon, a red-toned fence in a backyard, a chest in an old bedroom, or the faint scent inside a closet. These things do not all come from the same exact tree species, but they share enough qualities that the human mind gathers them under one feeling, one category, one name. And that category is not random. The trees called cedar tend to offer similar gifts. They are often evergreen. They often produce aromatic wood or foliage. They are often valued for durability, weather resistance, and a kind of dry, grounded beauty. So while the name may not always be exact in botanical terms, it still tells the truth in another way. It tells the truth of pattern, the truth of repeated human recognition. A tree that smells like cedar, lasts like cedar, shelters like cedar, and feels like cedar may keep the name, because language follows usefulness as much as ancestry. There is something relaxing in that idea too. Nature is exact in its own structures, but human beings often meet it through the senses first, through what holds up, through what smells familiar, through what remains after weather and time. Science later comes in to sort and refine those impressions, but the first contact is often simpler. We notice what lasts. We notice what returns. We notice what seems to carry the same quiet character from one place to another. So cedar is not a confusion to solve so much as a name with layers. Beneath it is true cedar in the botanical sense. Around it is a larger circle of trees that humans welcomed into the same family of meaning. And inside both uses of the word is the same general impression. Evergreen strength, aromatic presence, useful wood, and a long relationship with human life. That layered meaning will stay with us as we continue, because cedar is not only a question of classification, it is also a question of place, of where these trees grow, what kind of air surrounds them, and what sort of landscapes gave rise to such a lasting name in the first place. That lasting name begins, as many things in nature do, with landscape. Cedar belongs to places that often feel quiet in a very particular way. High slopes, dry air, deep forests, rocky ground, cool shadows, open ridges where wind moves steadily and seasons leave clear marks. Even when cedar grows in different parts of the world, it often carries something of that same atmosphere with it. A sense of endurance shaped by climate, elevation, and time. The true cedars, the trees in the Cedrus group, are native to a small but striking spread of regions. Some are tied to the mountains of the Mediterranean, including the famous cedar of Lebanon. Others grow in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. Still others belong to the Himalayas, where cedar rises through cool mountain air and steep terrain. These are not soft or easy landscapes. They are places where a tree must hold its own through cold, wind, dry spells, and thin soils. That helps explain why cedar came to be seen as strong and dignified. It was shaped in places where survival itself required a certain steadiness. The cedar of Lebanon is perhaps the most famous example. For thousands of years, it has stood as a symbol of endurance, height, and lasting value. These trees once covered much larger parts of the mountains than they do now. Their wood was prized so highly in the ancient world that whole civilizations cut and traded it for buildings, ships, and sacred structures. Even today, the image of the cedar remains deeply tied to Lebanon itself, where the tree came to stand for continuity and identity as much as for botany. In the Atlas Mountains, the Atlas cedar grows in cool upland forests, often mixed with other conifers and broadleaf trees. There too, cedar lives in a world of altitude, changing weather, and slow growth. In the Himalayas, the deodar cedar rises through valleys and mountain slopes, often in places where mist, snow, and steep ground shape the whole rhythm of life. The deodar has long been admired not only for its beauty and wood, but for the calm, lofty atmosphere of the landscapes where it grows. And then there are the many other trees called cedar outside the true cedar group. Western red cedar, for example, is native to the Pacific Northwest of North America. Its home is very different from the mountain dryness often linked with true cedar. It grows in damp coastal forests, in places of rain, moss, fog, and rich dark soil. It can become massive there, tall and deeply rooted, surrounded by fern-covered ground and thick air. And yet, despite the different setting, it still carries the qualities people came to associate with cedar: aromatic wood, durability, and a powerful physical presence. Eastern red cedar, which is actually a kind of juniper, lives in a different world again. It is found across much of eastern and central North America, often in dry or disturbed soils, open fields, rocky slopes, and old pasture edges. It is tough, adaptable, and able to survive where many other trees struggle. It may not have the vast height of a mountain cedar or a coastal giant, but it carries the same sense of persistence. So cedar does not belong to one single climate or one narrow visual image. It appears in mountain ranges, rain-soaked coasts, dry uplands, and open rough ground. What links these places is not sameness, but character. Cedar tends to be at home in landscapes where resilience matters, places where a tree must protect itself well, grow steadily, and remain present through change. That connection between tree and place is part of why cedar feels so rooted in the human imagination. A tree shaped by strong conditions often seems to carry those conditions inside itself. Dry mountain air, cool forest shade, long winters, harsh sun, quiet rainfall. Even after the tree becomes wood, some part of that world seems to remain in it. The scent, the grain, the durability, all of it feels like a memory of place made solid. And perhaps that is why cedar never feels entirely neutral. It often seems to bring a landscape with it. A room lined with cedar does not just smell like wood. It smells faintly of survival, of weather, of earth and air slowly worked into fiber. So before cedar becomes part of human structures, it is first a citizen of demanding places. It belongs to slopes and forests that teach patience. It rises where seasons are felt clearly, and in those places, one of the most visible things about cedar begins to make perfect sense. It stays green. That steady greenness is one of the first things people notice about cedar, even if they do not stop to name it. In a world where so much changes with the seasons, cedar often seems to hold its place. When nearby leaves yellow, fall, and leave branches bare, cedar remains green. When winter light grows thin and the landscape loses softness, cedar keeps its color. It may darken a little or seem quieter in the cold, but it does not let go of its foliage all at once, the way many broadleaf trees do. That alone gives cedar a different kind of presence in the forest. It feels constant. Cedar is an evergreen, which means it keeps its leaves year-round instead of dropping them all at once during autumn. But unlike the broad flat leaves of maples, oaks, or birches, cedar foliage is built differently. In true cedars, the leaves are needles, slender and tough, often gathered in clusters. In some of the other trees we call cedar, such as western red cedar, the foliage is made of flat, scale-like sprays. These leaves do not look dramatic in the way a large summer leaf does. They are small, modest, and built for staying power. That is part of the reason cedar can remain green through changing weather. Its foliage loses less water than broad, thin leaves would. The surface is smaller. The structure is tougher. A waxy coating helps slow moisture loss. The tree is not trying to grow fast and wide for one short season. It is built for steadier work, quiet work, work that can continue through heat, cold, wind, and dryness without constant rebuilding. A deciduous tree, the kind that drops its leaves, follows one strategy. It grows broad leaves when conditions are favorable, uses them fully, then lets them go before winter or drought can damage them too severely. That strategy works very well for many trees, but an evergreen like cedar follows another path. It invests in leaves that can last longer, sometimes for several years, and keeps them through changing conditions. That means the tree does not need to start from nothing each spring. It is already holding part of itself in readiness. There is a trade-off in this. Evergreen leaves usually do not gather sunlight as quickly or as powerfully as large, tender, broad leaves can during peak growing season, but they make up for that by staying in place longer. Cedar is not trying to race. It is trying to endure. It uses patience as part of its design. This evergreen nature also changes the atmosphere around the tree. A cedar forest in winter still has structure, depth, and shade. Snow may gather on the branches, frost may settle into the air, and the ground may harden. But the tree does not disappear into a skeleton of bare limbs. It still offers cover, still breaks the wind, still holds a dark green shape against pale skies. That matters not only visually, but ecologically. Birds, insects, and small mammals can still find shelter among cedar branches when much of the surrounding world has opened and thinned. The staying power of evergreen foliage is tied closely to the places where many cedars grow. In mountain climates, cool forests, exposed slopes, and nutrient-poor soils, it can be an advantage to hold on to leaves rather than rebuild them constantly. Making new foliage from scratch takes energy and nutrients. Cedar conserves both by keeping what it has, using each leaf for longer, asking more from it over time. That helps explain why cedar often feels older than it is, even when it is not one of the great ancient trees. A green tree in winter carries a certain gravity. It seems less tied to one season, less temporary. Its color does not flare and vanish. It simply remains. That steadiness has shaped the human response to cedar for a very long time. Evergreen trees often become symbols of endurance, continuity, and quiet life, because they stay visibly alive when other things look still or withdrawn. So cedar stays green, not by resisting the seasons in some magical way, but by being built carefully for them. Its leaves are smaller, tougher, slower to surrender moisture, and made to last. Its strategy is not brilliance followed by retreat. It is persistence. And that persistence is not only found in foliage. It continues downward into bark, fiber, scent, and wood, into the whole body of the tree, where cedar keeps building its quiet defenses layer by layer over time. A cedar does not only defend itself through leaf and scent, it also builds protection into its bark, its fibers, and the very grain of its body. From a distance, bark can seem like a simple outer covering, almost like wrapping around the real tree. But bark is part of the tree's living strategy. It shields the more delicate tissues underneath from cold, heat, insects, injury, and dryness. In cedar, that outer layer often has a rough, fibrous, or deeply ridged texture, depending on the kind of tree and its age. Some cedar bark peels in long strips. Some looks furrowed and rope-like. Some forms soft-looking plates that still hide a great deal of toughness. That roughness matters. Bark is the first barrier between the living tree and the changing world outside it. Strong sun can dry exposed tissue. Frost can crack tender surfaces. Insects search for openings. Fungi take hold where wood is weakened, so the bark stands there quietly, season after season, protecting what must remain alive beneath it. It does not stop every form of damage, but it slows danger down. And in the life of a tree, slowing danger is often enough. Beneath the bark, cedar continues that same work of patient defense through the structure of its wood. Cedar wood is often lighter than people expect, especially when compared with very heavy hardwoods. But light does not mean weak. Cedar has a kind of balanced strength. It is strong enough to endure weather and long use, yet flexible enough to bend slightly in wind, rather than always resist it with stiffness alone. That matters in forests, on slopes, and in places where storms and seasons keep testing the tree again and again. A tree that could not yield a little would break more often. Cedar survives partly because it is not only firm, but forgiving. Its fibers are arranged in a way that helps the tree remain stable while still responding to movement. Trunk and branch are not rigid poles. They are living structures built to carry weight, shift under pressure, and recover. Snow may settle on the boughs. Wind may pull at the crown. Rain may soak the trunk. Heat may draw moisture outward. Through all of that, the tree keeps holding together, not through hardness alone, but through a more subtle balance of strength and adaptability. That same structure helps explain why cedar wood remains valued even after the tree is cut. The natural compounds that help defend the living tree do not vanish at once. Cedar wood often resists rot better than many other woods because its chemistry continues to discourage the slow work of decay. This is one reason cedar became so useful to people in the first place. A tree that could survive weather in the forest often continued to survive weather after harvest as well. That durability can seem almost mysterious if we only look at finished wood in a fence, roof, chest, or wall. But the quality did not begin there. It began while the tree was still alive, building itself ring by ring, season by season, making tissue that could endure dampness, insects, and time more gracefully than many others. And that phrase matters with cedar more than with many trees. Ring by ring. Cedar is not built in haste. It is built slowly for survival. Each year adds another thin layer of growth, another quiet adjustment, another small response to the conditions around it. Wet years and dry years, mild winters and hard ones, all leave their trace in the wood. Over time, what emerges is not just a larger tree, but a more seasoned one. A tree shaped by conditions rather than rushed past them. That slow building gives cedar much of its character. The bark grows more textured. The trunk gains depth. The grain records time in narrow bands and subtle shifts. Even the scent, which we notice so easily, is part of a larger system of protection laid down over many years. Cedar becomes what it is through repetition, through patience, through the long discipline of staying rooted in one place and continuing to build. So when we touch cedar bark or notice the grain of cedar wood, we are meeting the visible result of a long defense. Not a dramatic one, not a violent one. Just a steady outer life shaped to protect an inner one. And when a tree is built that way from the inside out, it begins to leave its mark not only on a forest, but on the air around it. There are some forests that feel busy and bright, and others that seem to lower the whole pace of perception. Cedar often belongs to the second kind. To step into a cedar forest is not always to enter a place of drama. It is often to enter a place of reduced intensity. The light changes first. Under cedar branches, sunlight usually does not arrive in broad open sheets. It filters down in softer patterns, broken by layers of evergreen foliage. The result is often a dimmer, quieter kind of brightness, enough to see clearly, but less sharp, less exposed, less demanding on the eyes. That change in light matters more than people sometimes realize. Bright, open ground invites alertness. It gives the eye many edges to follow and many distances to measure. A cedar forest often does the opposite. It narrows the visual field a little. It softens contrast. It creates shade, depth, and intervals of muted green and brown. The mind does not have to work as hard to sort everything at once. Vision becomes steadier. The air can feel different there as well. Cedar forests often hold coolness, even when the day beyond them is warm. Shade protects the ground from direct sun, and the evergreen canopy slows some of the heating that would otherwise build quickly in open space. The forest floor may stay damp longer. Fallen needles, bark, and woody fragments gather into a softer surface that does not reflect heat the way stone or bare soil might. Walking there can feel like stepping into a slower layer of the day. Sound changes too. In open landscapes, sound travels broadly. It bounces, spreads, and sometimes feels exposed. In a cedar forest, sound is often softened by trunks, foliage, and uneven ground. Wind does not always vanish, but it becomes more textured. It moves through branches in a different way than it does through bare limbs or wide, flat leaves. Sometimes it produces only a light hush, sometimes a dry whisper, sometimes almost nothing at all. Even footsteps can sound quieter where the ground is cushioned by years of fallen plant matter. This is one reason cedar forests often feel still, even when they are not silent. Many small sounds remain, but they are gentler, less harshly defined, less insistent. A bird call seems to emerge from deeper within the trees. A branch shifting above does not crack so much as murmur. The whole place feels less like a surface and more like an interior. And then there is the scent. Cedar carries itself into the air even while standing still. The foliage, bark and wood all contribute something. On warm days, sunlight can draw aromatic compounds outward so that the forest seems lightly perfumed without ever feeling heavy. In cooler air, the scent may be fainter but still present, mixed with earth, needles, shade, and moisture. Near broken bark, fallen limbs, or warm trunks, the fragrance may become stronger, dry, woody, resinous, and clean. That scent does more than identify the trees. It changes the emotional tone of the place. Smell reaches human perception quickly and deeply, and in a cedar forest, it often creates a feeling that is difficult to separate into parts. Freshness, dryness, age, shelter, and stillness can all seem to arrive together. The forest does not just look like cedar. It feels like cedar in the air itself. Visually, cedar forests often carry a quiet order. Branches layer themselves in repeating forms. Trunks rise in strong lines. Tones remain muted, greens darkened by shade. Bark softened into browns, greys and reds, ground made less bright by needles and old growth. Nothing usually flashes. Nothing begs to be noticed. The forest holds itself with restraint. That restraint is part of why cedar can shape the sensory experience of place so strongly. A forest is not only a collection of trees. It is also a set of conditions. Light, temperature, sound, smell, texture, movement. Cedar influences all of them. It can make space feel enclosed without feeling crowded. It can make shade feel safe rather than empty. It can make the world seem to settle just by standing there. And when a forest changes the feeling of space that deeply, it also begins to shape the lives of the creatures moving through it. A cedar tree may seem self-contained from a distance, but in ecological terms, it is more like an anchor round which many smaller lives arrange themselves. That is true of most trees to some extent. But evergreen trees such as cedar often play a special role because they keep their structure through the whole year. A deciduous tree changes the forest dramatically when autumn strips away its leaves. Cedar does not do that. It continues to offer cover in winter, shade in summer, and a steady physical presence through changing conditions. For animals living close to weather and exposure, that consistency matters. Birds often use cedar for shelter, nesting, and rest. Dense evergreen branches can hide a small bird from wind, rain, or predators. In cold months, when bare branches elsewhere leave little protection, cedar still offers cover. A bird moving through a winter landscape may find in cedar one of the few places that still feels enclosed. Even when no nest is being built there, the tree remains useful simply because it softens the surrounding world. Small mammals also make use of cedar's steadiness. The space beneath branches can become a place of hiding or passage. The roots and lower structure of older trees create pockets of safety. In forests and rough landscapes, animals do not only need food, they need ways to disappear. Cedar often helps with that. Its shade, density, and year-round form create a kind of quiet architecture that other lives can move within. Insects, too, are part of the cedar world, though not always in the ways people expect. Because cedar is known for aromatic compounds that help defend it, it is easy to imagine the tree as standing apart from insect life altogether. But no tree exists outside the web of insects. Some feed on it, some shelter on it, some move through the bark, cones, foliage, or surrounding soil as part of a much larger forest system. Cedar does not reject life. It participates in the balance of it, offering resistance in some ways, while still remaining part of a living network. The ground beneath cedar can shape life as well. Needles, bark fragments, fallen cones, and shaded soil all create conditions different from those found in brighter or more open areas. Moisture may remain longer. Temperatures may stay more even. Certain plants may struggle there because of the low light, while mosses, fungi, and shade-tolerant life may find a foothold. What looks quiet from above often hides a slower, denser form of activity below. This is especially true when cedar trees grow old. An older cedar is not just a larger version of a young one. It often becomes a more important part of the local ecosystem. Its trunk may hold cavities. Its bark may form deep creases and protected spaces. Large branches may create sheltered zones above and below. The tree may become a resting place, a nesting place, a lookout, or a weather shield for many different forms of life at once. With age, cedar gathers not only years, but relationships. A very old tree can begin to shape the life around it in ways that go beyond simple shelter. Its shade alters soil conditions. Its fallen matter feeds the forest floor. Its presence changes wind patterns close to the ground. It becomes part of the structure of the place itself, not just something growing within it. This is one reason older forests often feel different from younger ones. The trees have had more time to become woven into the lives around them. And cedar does this with a kind of calm reliability. It does not produce showy fruit like an orchard tree. It does not lure attention with sudden seasonal color. It contributes through persistence, through cover, through the repeated offering of form, shade, and stability. A cedar stands there, and because it keeps standing there, other lives begin to depend on that fact. This is one of the quiet truths of ecology. A tree is not only a living thing by itself, it is also a condition for other living things. A branch becomes shelter. A trunk becomes surface. A root line becomes path. A shaded patch becomes refuge. Over time, a tree stops being merely an organism and becomes part of a whole local world. So cedar is not an isolated figure rising above the forest floor. It is a participant in a web of use and response, shelter and movement, season and survival. The stillness of the tree holds more activity than it first appears to. Birds disappear into it. Small lives move beneath it. Insects trace quiet paths across it. The forest arranges itself around its steady form. And that larger web begins with something very small, because even a cedar that stands for centuries once began in one of the quietest forms a tree can take. Before cedar becomes timber, shelter, fragrance, or symbol, it begins as a seed carried inside a cone, waiting for the right conditions to matter. That beginning is easy to overlook. When people think of cedar, they usually think of what lasts. The trunk, the wood, the scent, the height of the tree against the sky. But the life of cedar begins in a much smaller and quieter form, one that can rest unnoticed in the hand. A seed is a very humble start for something that may one day outlive generations of people. Yet that is how cedar enters the world each time, not as strength, but as possibility. Like other conifers, cedar reproduces through cones. These cones protect the seeds as they develop and help release them when the time is right. In true cedars, the cones often stand upright on the branches rather than hanging down. They can look solid and compact, almost like carved wooden shapes resting among the needles. As they mature, they slowly break apart, releasing seeds that can be carried away by wind. In some of the other trees we call cedar, the cones may look smaller, rounder, or more berry-like. But the basic story is similar. The tree forms a structure that protects the next generation until it is ready to begin. There is something fitting in that. A tree known for protection begins each new life by placing it inside a protective form. The cones themselves are part of the slow pace of cedar. They do not rush. They form over time, ripen gradually, and release their seeds according to weather, maturity, and the rhythms of the tree. Nothing about the process feels sudden. Cedar does not throw its future into the world in great dramatic bursts. It lets it go carefully, with patience, trusting chance, season, and landscape to do the rest. And chance matters. A seed may fall onto stone, into deep shade, onto dry ground, or into thick plant cover where it cannot take hold. Many seeds do not become trees. They are eaten, dried out, buried too deeply, or left in the wrong place. This is true for most plants, but it feels especially striking with cedar because the mature tree seems so stable and certain. It is easy to forget how vulnerable the beginning must have been. Before the trunk thickened, before the bark roughened, before the roots reached deep into the earth, there was only a small seed in an uncertain world. If conditions are good enough, the seed begins to wake. Moisture enters. The outer covering softens. The first root emerges and pushes downward, not upward. That is one of the quiet wisdoms of plants. Before reaching for light, the young cedar reaches for stability. It begins by anchoring itself. Only after that does the stem rise and the first small leaves appear above ground. At this stage, the tree is fragile. It can be shaded out by larger plants, damaged by heat, dryness, cold, trampling, or browsing animals. A seedling does not yet resemble the lasting cedar people admire. It is tender, exposed, and dependent on a narrow set of conditions. That contrast is part of what makes trees so moving to think about. The greatest firmness often begins in extreme softness, and cedar seedlings are not fast. Even in good conditions, the growth of a young cedar can be measured and gradual rather than explosive. Energy must be divided carefully between root, stem, and foliage. The tree is building a foundation first. It is learning the place where it stands. Soil depth, light levels, moisture patterns, wind exposure, nearby competition. All of these shape the future tree long before it looks impressive. This is why long-lived trees often seem to carry patience in their very nature. The pace is present from the beginning. Cedar does not begin as something grand and then slow down. It begins slowly and keeps that rhythm throughout its life. Growth may continue for centuries, but the habit of patience is there from the first root. So when we look at a mature cedar, broad in trunk and rich with scent, it helps to remember that all of it started in stillness, in a seed protected inside a cone, in a quiet descent to the ground, in a first root disappearing into earth before any branch touched the air. From that small beginning comes one of the most striking facts about cedar, which is not simply that it grows, but how long some of it can continue growing. Some trees pass through a human lifetime, almost as if it were weather, and cedar is one of the trees that can create that feeling. A person can live beside a cedar for many years and still know only a small part of its full span. That is one of the quiet powers of a long-lived tree. It changes the scale of thought. Instead of measuring life in years or even decades, the tree begins to suggest a different clock altogether. One made of rings, storms, winters, dry summers, slow healing, and steady upward growth. Some cedars can live for many hundreds of years, and in the right conditions some have lived far longer than that. Not every cedar reaches such an age, of course. Trees are shaped by drought, soil, competition, insects, disease, fire, wind, and human cutting. Many live far shorter lives. But the fact that cedar can endure for such long stretches of time is part of what gives it its unusual presence. Even when a particular tree is not ancient, the species carries the possibility of great age within it. That longevity does not happen by accident. It grows out of the same qualities we have already been following. Cedar protects itself through chemistry. It conserves through evergreen foliage. It builds slowly. Its wood resists decay better than many others. Its bark protects living tissue. Its structure allows a balance of strength and flexibility. All of those traits work together over time, not to make the tree immortal, but to give it a better chance of remaining. And remaining is one of the great tree achievements. A long-lived cedar is not simply a tree that has avoided death. It is a tree that has met many forms of difficulty and continued anyway. It has endured years when growth was easy and years when growth was thin. It has stood through mild seasons and harsh ones. It has recovered from broken branches, periods of dryness, insect pressure, and the countless small injuries that accumulate over a life rooted in one place. Each year leaves some trace, even if only in the width of a ring or the shape of a limb. That is why old cedar trees often look the way they do. Their trunks thicken. Their bark becomes more layered, more furrowed, more deeply marked by time. Their roots spread wider and anchor more firmly. Their crowns may broaden or become irregular. Some lower branches die back. Some great arms stretch outward while others are lost. The tree becomes less symmetrical in the simple youthful sense and more expressive in a deeper one. It begins to look not just large, but weathered into character. An old cedar can hold the history of its place in visible form. That history is not written in words, but in growth patterns. A narrow ring may suggest a difficult year. A scar may hint at past damage. A leaning trunk may reveal long response to wind or slope. A hollow space may show decay in one part of the tree while the rest still lives. Old trees are rarely perfect. Their beauty often lies in the opposite. They show endurance not as untouched purity, but as continued life shaped by time. And our response to such trees is often more than practical. Human beings tend to feel something in the presence of very old living things. A sense of scale, perhaps. or humility, or calm. A cedar that has been standing for centuries asks the mind to slow down, because the tree itself is the evidence of another pace of existence. It reminds us that life can unfold without urgency and still become vast. That feeling is strengthened by the fact that cedar often keeps its identity as it ages. The scent remains. The evergreen form remains. The bark deepens. The wood grows more seasoned. It does not become a completely different kind of presence with age. It becomes more fully itself. In that way, an old cedar can feel less like an aging thing and more like a concentrated one, as if time has not thinned it, but gathered it. Ecologically, that age matters too. Older cedar trees can become more valuable to the lives around them. They provide deeper shelter, larger structure, more complex surfaces, and more lasting stability in a forest. What age means to the tree, resilience, scale, depth, also means opportunity for birds, insects, fungi, and small mammals. The old tree becomes not just a survivor, but a place. So cedar belongs naturally to deep time. Not because every cedar becomes ancient, but because cedar is built in a way that makes old age possible, meaningful, and visible. It is one of those trees that lets us see what patience looks like when patience is given bark, grain, roots, and centuries to work with. And once a tree can endure that long, people rarely leave it alone for long. They name it, use it, honor it, and bring it into human life. The human relationship with cedar likely began in the simplest possible way, with people noticing that this tree looked strong, smelled distinct, and lasted unusually well. Long before scientific names, long before written records, people were already sorting the natural world by experience. They knew which wood rotted quickly, which trees split cleanly, which plants smelled sharp or sweet, which branches bent easily, and which trunks remained sound after years of weather. Cedar would have stood out early in that kind of close observation. It had qualities that could be felt almost at once. First, there was the scent. A freshly cut piece of cedar does not smell neutral. It announces itself. The aroma is dry, woody, resinous, and clean, and it lingers in a way many other woods do not. Even without understanding the chemistry behind it, people would have noticed that cedar seemed to carry some inner force. It smelled alive even after cutting. It changed the air around it. That alone would have made it memorable. Then, there was the way it lasted. People who work closely with natural materials learn quickly that not all wood behaves the same once it leaves the tree. Some woods absorb moisture easily. Some soften, rot, or attract insects. Some crack badly in heat or dampness. Cedar often holds up better than expected. Its natural compounds help resist decay, and its wood can remain useful for long periods, especially when compared with less durable materials. A tree that lasted in the forest often continued to last in human hands. That would have made cedar valuable not only as a tree to admire, but as a tree to seek out. There is also the matter of workability. Cedar is not only durable, it is often easier to shape than very hard, dense woods. That would have mattered greatly to early builders and craftspeople. A useful material is not just one that survives. It is one that can be cut, split, carved, lifted, fitted, and carried without impossible effort. Cedar offered a balance that people tend to value deeply in the natural world. It was strong, but not stubborn. Lasting, but not too heavy. Protective, but still workable. And then, of course, there was beauty. Humans are practical, but not only practical. A useful tree becomes even more important when it also looks and feels distinctive. Cedar often has appealing grain, warm tones, rich scent, and a kind of quiet dignity in both living and cut form. It is not surprising that a tree like that would move beyond usefulness into meaning. Many things in human culture begin that way. First, a thing proves useful. Then, because it remains close to daily life, people begin to associate it with larger ideas. Safety, endurance, honor, memory, home. That is how practical materials often become symbolic. If a wood resists rot, people may begin to see it as a sign of lastingness. If a tree lives for centuries, it may begin to represent continuity. If its scent seems purifying or calming, it may enter sacred or protective spaces. This kind of meaning does not arrive all at once. It gathers over time through repeated contact. A chest made of cedar protects valued belongings. A beam made of cedar outlasts other materials. A grove of cedar remains standing through changing seasons. Little by little, the tree becomes more than a resource. It becomes a presence with character. Cedar seems especially suited to that transition because its practical qualities and emotional qualities are so closely linked. The same natural compounds that protect the wood also produce the scent people remember. The same slow growth that helps create durable structure also allows for great age. The same evergreen steadiness that helps the tree survive also gives it symbolic power in the human mind. Very little about cedar feels accidental. Its usefulness and its meaning seem to grow from the same source. That may be why cedar appears so often, where humans wanted both strength and atmosphere. Not just in structures that had to stand, but in places that had to feel right. Storerooms, sleeping spaces, sacred rooms, chests, roof beams, walls, tools, objects meant to last. Cedar offered a material answer to physical problems, but it also shaped how a place felt once it was built. And that is usually the mark of a tree that people will keep close. Not just because they can use it, but because they begin to prefer a world that contains it. So the human attraction to cedar likely began in direct experience. A tree that smelled different, a wood that endured, a material that worked well in the hand, a presence that looked grounded and old even before it truly was. From there, the relationship deepened naturally. Cedar moved from the forest into tools, shelters, and memory, carrying its character with it the whole way. And once cedar entered human hands, its qualities did not disappear. They only changed form. A living cedar forest has one kind of presence. Cedar, as cut wood, has another, quieter, but no less distinctive. Once a cedar tree is harvested, something changes, but something also remains. The movement of branches stops. The roots no longer draw water upward. The tree no longer grows ring by ring. And yet cedar wood often keeps enough of the tree's character that it still feels unusually alive compared with many other materials. It holds scent. It keeps color. It resists decay. It carries forward some of the same protective qualities that once helped the living tree endure in the forest. That is part of what makes cedar such an interesting wood. It does not feel like a complete break from the tree it came from. It feels more like a continuation in another form. Cedar wood is often light in weight, compared with many other durable woods. That lightness would have mattered greatly to people using it for building, storage, transport, and craft. A wood that lasts but is also easier to lift, cut, and shape becomes deeply useful very quickly. Heavy hardwoods have their own strengths, but cedar offers a different kind of practicality. It is sturdy without being burdensome. It is workable without being weak. When people say a wood is workable, they usually mean it responds well to tools. It can be cut, shaped, and joined with relative ease. Cedar has long been valued for that quality. It can be sawn into boards, carved into objects, fitted into walls, and shaped into useful forms without the same resistance some harder woods would give. This does not mean cedar is soft in the sense of being fragile. It means it offers cooperation. The wood can be turned into things without fighting every step of the process. At the same time, cedar remains durable in a way that makes that work worthwhile. One reason is the same reason the tree smelled so distinctive while living. Cedar contains natural aromatic compounds that help resist fungi, rot, and some forms of insect damage. Those compounds do not vanish as soon as the tree is cut. They remain in the wood, often for years, and continue to influence how the material behaves. This is why cedar became known as a wood that could handle weather, moisture, and time better than many others. That resistance is not absolute. Cedar can still age, crack, gray, and eventually break down. But it usually does so more slowly and more gracefully than less durable woods. In the human world, where so much attention goes toward keeping things from spoiling, warping, rotting, or attracting pests, that made cedar feel almost naturally prepared for long use. The appearance of cedar wood adds to that sense of distinction. Depending on the type of cedar, the color can range widely. Some cedar woods lean toward soft golden brown. Others show rich reddish tones. Some have pale creamy bands beside darker streaks. Some weather toward silver gray when left outdoors. This variety means cedar does not have one single look, but many people still recognize something cedar-like in the overall effect. Warmth, dryness, a sense of natural tone rather than glossy boldness. The wood also tends to feel softer to the touch than many dense hardwoods. Not weak, just less severe. The grain may be straight or gently patterned, and the surface often takes on a quiet, inviting texture, whether left rough, smoothed by sanding, or aged through use. This is one reason cedar has such a strong place in human memory. It appeals through more than sight alone. It appeals through weight, touch, and smell all at once. And the smell matters here more than almost anywhere else. Many woods lose much of their identity once cut into boards and stacked with others. Cedar often does not. Open a cedar chest, sand a cedar plank, or bring home a fresh-cut cedar board, and the scent rises at once. It may soften over time, but it remains one of the clearest signs that cedar wood is still carrying the chemistry of the tree. That persistence gives cedar an unusual continuity. It is timber, yes, but it still seems to be speaking in the language of bark, needles, and living fibers. This may be why cedar is rarely treated in the human imagination as just another building material. A board of cedar is useful, but it is also atmospheric. It changes the feeling of the space around it. It keeps some memory of the forest in it, even after shaping and drying. That continuity is part of why cedar does not feel like ordinary lumber in the human imagination. It still seems to carry part of the tree with it. Even before cedar is used for anything, it asks to be noticed through surface alone. A board of cedar resting quietly against a wall does not behave like a neutral object. It already carries a presence. Before it becomes a chest, a fence, a lining, or a beam, it offers something through appearance and touch. The grain catches the eye. The color holds warmth. The surface suggests dryness, softness, and age all at once. Cedar rarely looks cold. Even when newly cut, it often seems to belong more to warmth than to hardness. Part of that effect comes from color. Cedar can appear in many shades depending on the species, the age of the wood, and how it has been cut or exposed to light and air. Some pieces show soft honey tones or pale yellow-brown. Others carry richer reds, rusty browns, or muted rose-like shades. In many boards, these colors sit beside lighter streaks or narrow bands, where the wood shifts gently from one tone into another. The result is often more layered than dramatic. Cedar does not usually shout through color. It glows quietly through it. That quiet range is one reason cedar has remained so appealing in both large structures and small objects. A strongly patterned wood can dominate a room. A very pale or very dark wood can create a sharper mood. Cedar often settles somewhere in a more balanced space. It brings visual interest, but also calm. The tones feel natural in the most grounded sense of the word, as though they belong easily to walls, floors, boxes, drawers, shelves, and warm interior light. The grain adds another part of cedar's identity. In many pieces, the grain runs with a kind of calm clarity. It may be straight, gently lined, or softly varied, but it usually remains readable to the eye. There is texture without chaos. Even when knots appear, they often feel like part of the wood's character, rather than an interruption of it. The grain reminds you that this was once a living structure, built ring by ring, shaped by growth, weather, and time. It offers a visible record, but not an overwhelming one. Touch deepens that effect. Cedar often feels softer than people expect, especially if they are used to dense hardwoods. The surface can seem dry but not brittle, smooth but not slick, warm but not heavy. It welcomes the hand. A polished metal object stays cool and distant until warmed by contact. Cedar often seems already halfway there. Even at room temperature, it can feel more inviting than materials that are technically harder or more valuable. It asks less of the senses in order to be appreciated. That may be why cedar is so often associated with warmth rather than mass. It does not impress by brute heaviness. It impresses by harmony. Color, grain, softness, and scent work together so closely that people often experience cedar as a whole, rather than as separate features. A person does not always think, "This smells good, this looks good, this feels good." They simply register that cedar has a certain presence, one that is easy to stay near. Scent is never far from that impression. Even when the wood is not fresh, even when the surface has aged, sanded edges or enclosed spaces can still release the familiar dry, aromatic fragrance. That smell ties the visual and tactile experience back to the tree itself. The grain shows growth. The scent shows chemistry. The warmth of the tone suggests long use and quiet durability. Together, they form a strong sensory identity that cedar keeps even after it has been shaped into human use. This is why cedar became so natural a choice for objects meant to be handled or lived beside. Furniture, paneling, chests, drawers, closet linings, small boxes, carved items, shelves. These are not only practical uses, they are forms of closeness. They place cedar where the hand may touch it, where the eye may rest on it, where the scent may gather in still air. Some materials are best at a distance. Cedar often seems best within reach. There is also something restful in the way cedar ages. The surface may dry further, soften in tone, darken slightly, or silver if left outside. It rarely becomes less itself. Even weathering tends to reveal more of its quiet character rather than erase it. Cedar does not need to remain new in order to remain beautiful. In some ways, it becomes more fully cedar with time. And when a material looks and feels that distinctive, people rarely keep it at the level of pure usefulness. They start giving it roles inside the home. There are some woods people build with, and some woods people also seem to live with, almost as if they want the material itself nearby. Cedar belongs to that second kind. It has long been used in practical building, of course. Cedar boards have gone into siding, shingles, fences, posts, and outdoor structures because the wood stands up well to weather and resists decay better than many others. A material that can survive damp air, sun, and changing seasons without breaking down too quickly becomes deeply useful in everyday life. But cedar did not remain only on the outside of human spaces. It moved inward. That is where its story becomes especially interesting. Some woods are chosen because they are strong enough to hold weight. Some because they are inexpensive. Some because they are easy to find. Cedar was often chosen for another reason as well. People liked what happened when it was present. The smell, the tone of the wood, the dryness of its surface, the sense of calm order it could bring to a room, a chest, a shelf, or a storage space. Cedar became not only a structural material, but a domestic one. Closets are one clear example. A cedar-lined closet is not just a place where wood happens to be present. It is a place where the wood itself becomes part of the experience of storage. Open the door and the air changes. It smells cleaner, drier, more contained. The space feels less like a blank interior and more like a protected chamber. That feeling matters. Human beings do not only store objects, they also respond to the atmosphere in which those objects are kept. Cedar chests carry the same feeling in a more intimate form. A chest made from cedar or lined with cedar becomes a place for fabric, papers, keepsakes, blankets, seasonal clothing, or treasured things. The chest is useful, certainly, but it also suggests protection. To place something inside cedar is to feel, at least partly, that the object is being kept in the care of the wood itself. that may not be a scientific thought in a strict sense, but it is a human one, and it has shaped how cedar has been used for generations. Wall panels and interior boards add another layer. A room lined in cedar does not only look warm, it often feels quieter, softer, and more settled. The reddish or golden tones catch light gently. The grain repeats without harshness. The scent may be faint or strong depending on age and finish, but even when subtle, it adds something to the air. Cedar interiors can feel less like sealed manufactured spaces and more like places that still remember the forest in some quiet way. That effect helps explain why cedar found its way into cabins, storage rooms, saunas, porches, and older family spaces where usefulness and comfort were expected to exist together. It offered durability, but also atmosphere. A person could lean against a cedar wall, open a cedar drawer, or step into a cedar closet and experience something beyond simple function. The material did not disappear into the background completely. It continued to participate. Even on the outside of homes, cedar carries this dual identity. Shingles and siding protect a structure from weather, but they also shape how the house feels from a distance. Fresh cedar can glow warmly. Aged cedar can weather into silvery grey. Fences made of cedar mark boundaries, but also soften them with texture and scent. A gate, a post, a deck rail. Even these practical forms seem gentler in cedar than in many harsher materials. This movement from exterior use to interior use tells us something important. People trusted cedar first because it lasted. Then, over time, they began keeping it close because they liked the world it created around them. The same qualities that made cedar valuable outdoors, resistance, steadiness, durability, also made it desirable indoors, where scent, warmth, and calm matter more. And beneath all of this is a deeper human wish. We do not only want to build spaces that stand. We want to build spaces that protect. Spaces where important things can remain safe, dry, ordered, and preserved. Cedar fit that wish unusually well. Its chemistry discouraged decay. Its scent suggested cleanliness and care. Its surface made even simple storage feel more deliberate. That is why cedar became woven so naturally into the domestic world. It met practical needs, but it also answered quieter ones. The need to preserve, the need to order, the need to create a space where what matters can be kept in good condition, touched by something that seems calm, lasting, and trustworthy. That protective role became especially famous in one very specific part of household life, where cedar developed a near mythic reputation. For many people, cedar enters memory not first as a tree, but as a closet, a chest, or a drawer where fabric and time were expected to remain undisturbed. That small domestic setting helped give cedar one of its most famous reputations. People came to believe that cedar protected clothing, blankets, linens, and stored fabrics from moths and other small threats. Over time, this idea became so familiar that cedar itself almost seemed to stand for safekeeping. A cedar chest was not just a box. A cedar closet was not just a storage space. They felt like places where delicate things could rest under a kind of quiet protection. There is some real science beneath that old belief. Cedar wood releases aromatic compounds into the air, and some of those compounds can help repel certain insects. In enclosed spaces where the scent gathers instead of drifting away, the effect can become more noticeable. This is one reason cedar-lined storage became so popular. The wood did not simply sit there looking warm and handsome. It actively changed the air around stored fabric. But the story is not as simple as old household wisdom sometimes made it sound. Cedar does not create a magical shield. It does not guarantee that every moth, larva, or insect will stay away forever. Its effect depends on several things, including how fresh the wood is, how strong the scent remains, how tightly the space is enclosed, and what stage of insect life is present. Over time, cedar can lose some of its aromatic strength, especially if it is sealed, aged, or no longer freshly exposed. A cedar chest that once smelled strong may need sanding or renewal to release more of its scent into the air. That is important because many old beliefs about cedar grew from repeated experience, but repeated experience often becomes simplified into certainty. If a family stored blankets in cedar for years and saw fewer signs of damage, cedar gained a reputation for protection. That reputation was not invented from nothing. It was based on real patterns people noticed. But over generations, the nuance often disappeared, and what remained was the cleaner story. Cedar keeps moths away. The truth is gentler and more interesting than that. Cedar can help. Cedar can make a space less inviting. Cedar can contribute to preservation, especially in quiet, enclosed places where its vapors are allowed to collect. But cedar works best as part of a larger condition of careful storage, dryness, cleanliness, and enclosure. In that sense, cedar belongs more to the world of support than to the world of certainty. It improves the conditions of protection rather than replacing them. And that may be one reason cedar became so beloved. It fits naturally into the human idea of care. A person folding winter clothing into a cedar chest is not only solving a practical problem, they are performing a small act of preservation. They are asking time to pass without damage. They are creating a pause in use, a season of stillness, and trusting that what matters will remain sound until needed again. Cedar became part of that ritual because it seemed to share the same goal. It smelled clean. It lasted well. It gave the impression of guarding what was placed inside it. This is where the emotional life of cedar deepens. By the time a material is trusted with clothing, blankets, letters, or heirlooms, it has already moved beyond simple usefulness. It has entered the realm of relationship. People begin to feel that cedar is not only a wood they use, but a wood they rely on. A wood that helps keep things in order against the slow pressures of time, dampness, insects, and neglect. That trust shows how powerful atmosphere can be in everyday life. The smell of cedar in a closed space does not only suggest insect resistance, it suggests attention. It suggests that the space has been prepared, that someone cared enough to choose a material known for protection. In that way, cedar works not only chemically, but psychologically. It makes a storage space feel intentional. So the old image of cedar and moths endures because it contains two truths at once. One is practical. Cedar vapors really can help make stored spaces less friendly to certain insects. The other is symbolic. Cedar came to represent the larger hope that what is precious can be kept safe from quiet forms of loss. That reputation tells us something important. because by the time people trust a material to protect what they value, the material has already become more than material. The scent of cedar does not remain trapped in boards and trunks. People learned very early that it could be carried, distilled, burned, and released more directly. A cedar tree standing in a forest gives off its fragrance in a quiet way. The scent may drift from bark, foliage, warmed wood, or broken branches, but it remains part of the larger atmosphere of the place. Once people began cutting cedar, shaving it, burning it, and working with its oils, that same fragrance became more immediate. It could move from background presence to direct experience. The tree no longer needed to be alive and rooted in order for its scent to shape the air. This is where cedar becomes especially interesting, because smell begins to travel farther than the wood itself. Cedarwood oil is one of the clearest examples. Essential oils are concentrated aromatic substances taken from plant material, usually through methods that separate the fragrant compounds from the rest of the plant. In the case of cedar, the oil may come from the wood itself, and sometimes from related aromatic species that share cedar-like qualities. The result is a concentrated form of the scent people already know from closets, chests, and boards, but stronger, more focused, and more immediate. A drop of cedarwood oil can fill a small space far more quickly than a cedar board resting in the corner of a room. The same compounds that once helped defend the tree now become part of perfume, incense, household fragrance, and calming blends used for stillness and rest. In that concentrated form, cedar often smells dry, woody, warm, and slightly smoky. Some people notice something almost pencil-like in it. Others notice a cleaner, resinous depth or a faint sweetness beneath the dryness. It is a scent that tends to feel grounded rather than bright. Warmth changes it even further. When cedar wood is heated, whether by sun, hand, friction, or fire, more aromatic compounds enter the air. This is why a cedar deck in summer, a cedar sauna, or a recently sanded cedar surface can smell so vivid. Heat makes the scent more active. It moves the fragrance outward, turning what was quiet into something closer and fuller. Smoke does something similar, though in a different way. When cedar is burned, whether as wood, chips, or incense, the scent changes again. It becomes deeper, darker, more immediate, and sometimes more ceremonial in feeling. The dry, woody quality remains, but smoke adds its own layer, one associated with warmth, air movement, firelight, and the passing of something from solid form into atmosphere. The tree that once stood rooted in stillness becomes breath, room, memory. That transformation may help explain why cedar smoke has held such a strong place in human life. Smoke already carries symbolic weight in many cultures because it rises, lingers, and changes space in a visible and invisible way at once. When the smoke itself smells like cedar, a material already associated with durability, purity, and protection, the effect can feel especially powerful. The room is no longer just occupied, it is altered, and scent does not need much help to do that. Smell works quickly on the human mind. It can change the emotional tone of a place before words or thoughts fully catch up. A room touched by cedar oil or cedar smoke often feels calmer, more enclosed, more grounded, even if the person entering could not immediately explain why. The fragrance creates a kind of environmental suggestion. It hints at order, dryness, age, and shelter. It can make a modern space feel older, softer, more connected to wood, weather, and time. This is one reason cedar became such a natural part of soothing spaces. A fragrance associated with durable wood and long-lived trees does not feel restless. It does not move sharply through the air the way some floral or citrus scents do. It settles. It gives the impression of stability. In that way, concentrated cedar scent still carries something of the original tree's character. Slow growth, protection, endurance, quiet presence. So cedar in oil, smoke, and fragrance is not separate from cedar as tree or timber. It is another expression of the same inner chemistry, released more directly into human experience. The wood remains in one place, but the scent can travel. It can fill a room, cling to memory, or create atmosphere without the whole trunk ever being seen. And once a tree's scent can fill a room without the whole tree being present, cedar begins to cross from nature into symbol. There are certain trees people use, and certain trees people revere. Cedar has often belonged to both groups at once. That combination is not as common as it may seem. Many useful materials remain practical in the human imagination. They are cut, shaped, traded, and used without gaining much symbolic weight beyond their function. Cedar often followed a different path. Because it was durable, fragrant, long-lasting, and visually striking, it moved easily from the world of construction into the world of meaning. A tree that could build roofs and walls could also become a tree associated with respect, purification, memory, and sacred presence. Part of that begins with simple human instinct. People tend to reserve their strongest symbols for things that already carry unusual qualities in the physical world. A tree that lives a long time, smells distinctive, resists rot, and rises with quiet dignity is likely to gather significance. Its practical usefulness makes it valuable. Its endurance makes it impressive. Its scent changes the atmosphere around it. Together, those traits make cedar feel like more than raw material. It feels set apart. That helps explain why cedar appears so often in sacred buildings and ceremonial settings. A durable wood is naturally attractive for places meant to last. Temples, shrines, gathering places, and important communal buildings are rarely made from materials chosen carelessly. If a structure matters spiritually or socially, the material itself begins to matter too. Cedar was often well suited to that role. It offered strength without extreme heaviness, resistance to decay, and an aroma that changed the feeling of enclosed space. A room built with cedar did not simply stand. It also carried a kind of air around it, dry, woody, calm, and distinct. Scent has always played an important role in ritual life. Across many cultures, fragrant materials have been burned, placed, worn, or carried in order to mark a space as different from ordinary life. Smell works quickly. It reaches inward without demanding explanation. A place touched by cedar smoke or cedar wood may feel quieter, cleaner, or more deliberate, even before anyone says a word. This is one reason fragrant trees and resins so often become linked with purification or reverence. They alter the atmosphere in a way people experience directly. Cedar's endurance adds another layer to that sacred quality. human beings often connect what lasts with what matters. A tree that resists weather and time can come to symbolize continuity, protection, and stability. These are qualities people often seek in sacred life, as well as in daily life. A fleeting material can still be beautiful, but a lasting one suggests something deeper, something that remains. Cedar, by its nature, offered that suggestion again and again. It is important, though, to hold this part of the story carefully. Cedar has entered sacred and ceremonial traditions in different ways in different cultures. It should not be treated as though there is only one cedar meaning everywhere. In some places, cedar became tied to temples and royal building. In others, it became part of smoke, cleansing, prayer, or protected space. In some traditions, specific species of cedar carry particular importance. In others, the tree's fragrance and durability shaped its role more broadly. The meanings are real, but they are not all the same. Respect begins with allowing that variety to remain intact. Still, even across very different times and places, similar patterns appear. People notice trees that endure. People notice scents that change a room. People notice materials that seem to resist corruption, dampness, insects, and age. It is not surprising that these qualities would gather sacred value. A fragrant wood that lasts can feel naturally suited to ceremony because it already seems to hold both strength and atmosphere. It offers not only structure but mood, not only usefulness but presence, and presence matters in ritual. Sacred spaces are often shaped not just by belief but by sensation. The light is different, the air is different, sound may soften, smell may linger, materials may suggest age, care, and continuity. Cedar fits easily into that world because it contributes to those conditions without becoming flashy or loud. It does not overwhelm the space. It deepens it. So cedar became one of those rare trees that crossed easily between daily life and reverence. It could be cut and used, yet still remain honored. It could serve practical needs while also carrying symbolic weight. It could become beam, smoke, oil, wall, shrine, chest, or grove, and still feel recognizably cedar in every form. That sacred dimension deepened further when cedar became tied not only to ceremony, but to the memory of whole civilizations. Long before cedar appeared in modern closets or lined drawers, it had already passed through temples, ships, palaces, and trade routes. In the ancient world, cedar was not just another useful tree. It was one of the most prized timbers people could find. That was especially true of the cedar of Lebanon, a tree that grew in the mountains of the eastern Mediterranean and became famous far beyond its home landscape. For ancient builders, rulers, and traders, cedar offered a rare combination of qualities. It was strong, relatively straight, workable, aromatic, and more resistant to rot than many other woods. A tree with those traits was never likely to remain local for long. One reason cedar became so valued was simple practicality. Large building projects need timber that can span space, hold weight, and last. In regions where suitable large trees were not always easy to find, cedar stood out. Its trunks could provide beams for roofs, supports for halls, and planks for doors and interiors. A material that could rise into temples and palaces, while also holding up against time, quickly became associated with importance. Its scent added something further. A cedar beam did not only support a structure, it changed the air inside it. In enclosed spaces, the fragrance of cedar would have been noticeable, especially when the wood was fresh. That meant cedar brought atmosphere into important buildings as well as strength. A palace or temple built with cedar was not only made to endure, it also carried a distinct sensory character. In the ancient world, where smell was part of daily life in a much more direct way than many modern people realize, that would have mattered. Cedar also became important in shipbuilding. Seafaring cultures needed wood that could be shaped into vessels and survive hard use. Water, salt, sun, and movement placed constant demands on timber. Cedar's durability made it attractive for parts of ships and for other maritime uses. This meant the tree was not only tied to mountains and sacred buildings, it also moved outward into harbors, coastlines, trade networks, and journeys across open water. The tree of one region became part of the mobility of many others. That movement increased cedar's status even more. Once a material becomes part of long-distance trade, it changes in human imagination. It is no longer only a local resource gathered by nearby hands. It becomes something sought, transported, measured, taxed, gifted, and fought over. Cedar moved along trade routes because people wanted it badly enough to organize labor, animals, tools, and transport around it. Trees had to be cut in difficult terrain, moved down from mountain forests, and carried towards cities and ports. That work took planning, power, and time. The farther cedar traveled, the more it became linked with prestige. And prestige often grows from a combination of usefulness and scarcity. If cedar had been everywhere, easy to gather in limitless quantity, it might still have been valued, but not in quite the same way. Part of what raised its status was that the best cedar forests were limited. Valuable trees do not remain abundant for long once great building powers begin cutting them heavily. Over time, this combination of desirability and scarcity made cedar even more closely tied to elite use. Rulers wanted it, temples used it, palaces displayed it. Great states measured wealth and power partly through access to precious materials, and cedar entered that world fully. This gave the tree a role in memory as well as construction. When people looked at a great building roofed in cedar, they were not only seeing architecture, they were seeing long effort made visible. Forests cut in distant mountains, laborers hauling timber, traders moving goods, craftsmen shaping beams, rulers claiming power through durable materials. Cedar carried all of that inside it. A beam was not just wood. It was distance, labor, planning, and ambition turned into structure. That may be why cedar began to feel larger than the forest itself. It became tied to empire, to sacred life, to organized power, and to the dream of making something that would last. A tree that already lived a long time in nature became part of human attempts to create endurance in stone, wood, and memory. An ancient people clearly remembered where such timber came from. The fame of cedar forests traveled with the wood. The tree became known not just by touch and scent, but by origin and reputation. Certain mountains, certain groves, certain lands became associated with cedar in ways that lasted for centuries. The forest entered history because the wood entered civilization. And once a tree begins carrying that much history, it no longer belongs only to botany or construction. It begins to enter language itself. Even now, people who have not studied cedar closely can often recognize the feeling of it almost at once. That is part of what makes cedar unusual. Many natural materials are familiar only in one setting. A person knows them in the forest, or in a workshop, or in a house, but not across all three. Cedar moves between these worlds very easily. It can be a tree on a mountainside, a board in an old chest, a wall in a sauna, a fence in summer light, a pencil in the hand, or the faint smell inside a drawer that has stayed closed for months. And somehow, through all those changes, it still feels recognizably like cedar. Part of that comes from scent. Smell has a fast path into memory. Long before the thinking part of the mind begins naming what is present, a scent can already stir recognition. Cedar often reaches people in exactly that way. A dry, woody smell in a warm room, a fresh shaving from a sharpened pencil, a lid lifted from an old trunk, sun hitting cedar boards on a porch or fence. These moments may seem small, but they accumulate quietly over a lifetime. The brain does not need a grand event in order to attach feeling to a scent. Repetition is often enough. That is why cedar can feel familiar even to people who could not identify the tree in a forest. They may not know the species. They may never have read about cedar oils, bark, or cones. But they know the emotional outline. They know what the scent feels like. They know the tone it brings to a room or object. Cedar often enters human life in little doses, repeated over many years, until it becomes emotionally anchored without needing much explanation. A child may know cedar first through a pencil box. The smell rising after a freshly sharpened point curls away in thin ribbons. Someone else may know it through an old blanket chest in a grandparent's room. Another through the warm, dry air of a cedar sauna. Another through cabin walls, deck boards, old furniture, outdoor fencing, or storage drawers lined in pale reddish wood. None of these experiences has to be dramatic. In fact, their quietness may be part of the reason they stay. Cedar often belongs to the background of life rather than the foreground. It is there while something else happens. Clothes are folded, tools are put away, a porch warms in summer, a room sits still in afternoon light, a pencil is used in school, a closet is opened then closed again. Because cedar accompanies such ordinary moments, it can become tied not to one sharp memory, but to an entire mood of living. Order, dryness, calm, usefulness, shelter. That kind of familiarity is powerful in a different way than excitement is powerful. It sinks deeper. Things repeated in low, steady contact often shape the emotional world more quietly, but more lastingly, than things that call attention to themselves all at once. This may also explain why cedar can feel older than the moment in which it is encountered. Its scent often carries suggestions of age even when the wood itself is not especially old. Perhaps that is because cedar has lived with people for so long in so many forms. Or perhaps it is because dry woody scents tend to suggest storage, permanence, and things kept safe over time. Either way, cedar often arrives with more than itself. It seems to bring a faint sense of before, and this makes cedar especially interesting as a material of memory. Not memory in the dramatic sense of one unforgettable event, but memory in the layered sense, the kind built from many small exposures over many years. Smell in a hallway, warm wood in a summer structure, a box opened during a change of season, a cedar chest carrying blankets from one winter to the next. Each experience is minor by itself. Together, they build a deep familiarity. The brain is very good at forming emotional links from repeated sensory contact. A scent that appears in calm, protected, or orderly settings again and again begins to carry those feelings with it. Later, even a brief return of the smell can call them back. Not always as a clear picture, sometimes more as a tone, a soft return of atmosphere, a sense that something is known, settled, and slightly out of time. So cedar becomes memorable, not because it demands remembrance, but because it enters life gently and stays there. Tree, wood, object, room, and scent keep repeating the same character in different forms until the human mind begins to treat that character itself as familiar. That may be why cedar often seems to carry time differently, not only in forests and rings, but in rooms and recollections. Few materials make the passage of time feel as visible and as gentle as cedar does. Some things age by becoming unrecognizable. They crack, darken, weaken, or lose the very qualities that once made them appealing. Cedar often follows a softer path. Time changes it, certainly. It silvers outdoors. It darkens in places. It dries further. It softens in scent or releases it in new ways when cut or warmed. But through those changes, cedar usually remains itself. Age does not erase its identity so much as deepen it. That continuity begins in the living tree. Every cedar records time in growth rings, thin yearly layers laid down one season after another. Some years leave wider bands, suggesting more favorable conditions. Some years leave narrower ones, showing slower growth under stress. The tree does not announce these records on the surface while it lives, but they are there, held quietly inside the trunk. Time becomes structure. Weather becomes grain. A century is not an idea to the tree. It is a pattern built into wood. When cedar is cut and shaped into boards or objects, that record remains present. The grain still carries the history of growth. The lines in a plank are not decoration added later. They are the visible memory of the tree's years. That gives cedar a different kind of beauty from materials made all at once. A board of cedar is not only a surface, it is time flattened into view. Then a second form of aging begins. Once cedar enters human use, it starts gathering a new history. Outdoors, sun and rain alter the surface. Fresh reddish or golden tones may fade towards soft grey or silver. This weathering is one of the most distinctive things about cedar. Many materials look diminished when exposed for years. Cedar often looks calmer. The colour becomes quieter, the surface more subdued, but the wood can remain beautiful in a different register. The passing of time becomes visible without becoming ugly. Indoors, the change may be slower, but it still happens. Cedar in a chest, drawer, wall, or shelf may darken gently with age. The scent may become fainter in the open air, though it often remains close beneath the surface, ready to rise again when the wood is sanded, cut, or enclosed. The texture can shift too. What was once newly smooth may become slightly drier, softer in edge, more settled in feel. These are not dramatic changes. They are the kind that reward repeated notice. That is one reason cedar feels so suited to long human use. It does not insist on permanent newness. It allows age to show. This makes cedar especially interesting because both the tree and the timber become forms of timekeeping. In the living cedar, time is marked by rings, bark, branching, scars, lean, and root spread. In the cedar object, time is marked by wear, silvering, darkening, smoothing, and the soft changes brought by air, touch, and season. One grows in a forest, the other grows older in a room, a porch, a fence line, a chest, or a wall. But both are recording the same basic thing, that life leaves marks, and those marks can become part of the meaning rather than damage to be hidden. Human beings often respond deeply to materials that age well. We seem to trust them more. A thing that can remain useful and beautiful after years of use gives a kind of reassurance. Cedar offers that reassurance in a very calm way. It does not become polished by time so much as seasoned by it. Like an old tree, it can look more complete after weather, and years have had their say. This may be why cedar often feels more evocative as it ages, not less. A fresh cedar board is lovely, but an old cedar chest, an outdoor cedar wall gone grey, or a weathered fence carrying sun and rain for years can hold another kind of depth. The wood seems to have entered into partnership with time rather than fighting it. It remains recognizable, but also fuller, quieter, more layered. So cedar teaches something subtle about aging. Change does not always mean loss of character. Sometimes change reveals character more clearly. A tree becomes more itself through years of growth. A cedar object becomes more itself through years of use. In both cases, time is not simply passing over the surface. It is entering into it, shaping it gently, leaving a visible record that can be read by the eye, the hand, and sometimes even by scent. And when a tree can remain itself through growth, harvest, use, weather, and memory, it starts to reveal something broader than its own story. By this point, cedar has become difficult to place in just one category, and that may be the clearest thing it reveals. At first, cedar may seem easy to name. It is a tree. Then it becomes more than that. It is a habitat for birds and small lives. It is chemistry shaped into scent. It is wood shaped into walls, chests, closets, and beams. It is a material linked with protection, memory, and reverence. It is a living evergreen in the forest, and a dry, fragrant board in a quiet room. The more closely we look, the harder it becomes to keep cedar inside any single definition. And perhaps that is part of its quiet lesson. Nature rarely stays inside the neat categories human beings make for it. A tree is never only a tree. It is structure, shelter, surface, chemistry, time, and relationship, all at once. Cedar makes that especially easy to see because so many of its qualities remain recognizable across different forms. The same scent that helps defend the living tree also lingers in the cut wood. The same durability that helps the tree endure weather makes the timber useful in homes. The same steady evergreen presence that shapes a forest also shapes the emotional meaning people attach to cedar over centuries. There is a continuity there that feels almost unusual. Sometimes human use strips a natural thing of its original character. A plant becomes fiber, a tree becomes lumber, a stone becomes wall. The source disappears behind the object. Cedar often resists that disappearance. Even after harvest, it still seems to carry itself forward. A cedar chest does not feel unrelated to the tree. A cedar wall still holds something of the forest in it. A room scented with cedar oil still points back toward bark, wood, and slow growth, even if no trunk is visible. The natural form and the human use remain linked. That may be why cedar moves so easily through different layers of life. In the forest, cedar helps shape shade, shelter, scent, and stillness. In ecology, it becomes part of a web of birds, insects, soil, and season. In human life, it becomes storage, structure, furniture, atmosphere, and ritual. In memory, it becomes one of those rare materials that can be recalled not only by image, but by feeling. Very few things pass so naturally through biology, craft, domestic life, sacred meaning, and personal recollection without losing their identity somewhere along the way. Cedar does. And in doing so, it reveals something about how human beings meet the natural world. We do not only understand nature by classifying it, we also understand it by living with it, by noticing what lasts, by remembering how something smells, by seeing which materials weather well, which spaces feel calm, which objects seem to carry more than their own shape. Cedar becomes meaningful not because people invented meaning from nothing, but because the tree kept offering the same quiet set of qualities in many different places. Durability, scent, warmth, protection, steadiness. Over time, those repeated experiences became culture, memory, and symbolism. So cedar is not just an example of a useful tree. It is an example of how one natural form can move through many layers of reality at once. It begins in earth, water, light, and slow growth. It becomes bark, needle, cone, and root. It becomes habitat. It becomes timber. It becomes shelter. It becomes a room lined in warm grain. It becomes a chest where cloth and letters are kept dry. It becomes smoke. It becomes oil. It becomes a phrase, a memory, a feeling of age and calm carried in the air. Through all of these forms, cedar keeps expressing the same basic character without needing to announce itself. That consistency may be what makes it so restful to think about. There is comfort in things that remain themselves. In a world full of quick change and constant replacement, cedar suggests another kind of existence, one where strength does not need hardness alone, one where usefulness does not cancel beauty, one where age can deepen identity rather than erase it, one where the same tree can belong to the forest, the home, the sacred space, and the memory without becoming fragmented. So perhaps the most restful thing about cedar is not only what it is, but how consistently it seems to remain itself through every form it takes. And so the thought of cedar settles the way cedar itself often does, quietly, steadily, and without needing to demand attention. By now, cedar has taken many forms. It has stood as a tree in mountain air and forest shade. It has become bark, cone, root, an evergreen branch. It has become board, chest, wall, and beam. It has moved through homes, sacred spaces, memory, and time. And yet, through all of those forms, something simple has remained. Cedar keeps offering the same calm character again and again. There is the tree itself, rising slowly, holding its color through the seasons, building strength ring by ring. There is the wood, dry, warm, and quietly durable, shaped by human hands, but still carrying the scent and grain of where it came from. And there is the fragrance, one of the most recognizable parts of cedar, moving through air in a way that feels both fresh and old, both clean and deeply rooted. Tree, wood, and scent are not separate stories in the end. They are three expressions of the same nature. That may be why cedar can feel so steady in the mind. It does not need to surprise in order to leave an impression. It does not need bright color, sudden motion, or great noise. Its presence is slower than that. It works through repetition, through quiet contact, through the gradual building of familiarity. A shaded grove, a warm board in sunlight, a closet door opening, a chest lifted after many months, a faint woody scent in still air. Cedar enters life softly, and because of that, it often stays. There is also something reassuring in the way cedar seems built for endurance. It protects itself through chemistry. It grows with patience. It resists rot more gracefully than many other woods. It can weather, age, silver, darken, and still remain recognizably itself. In the forest, that gives it a long life. In human spaces, it gives it a long memory. Perhaps that is why cedar so often feels protective, even when it is doing nothing at all. A cedar wall, a cedar chest, a cedar-lined drawer. Even a simple cedar board can seem to hold a quiet intention. Not a dramatic kind of protection. Just the gentle idea that some things can be kept well. That time can pass without taking everything from a place. That order, shelter, and calm can be built into the world with natural things. And cedar carries that feeling without effort. It does not ask to be admired. It simply remains. In a way, cedar has shown us the same lesson from beginning to end. A thing can be strong without harshness. It can be useful without losing beauty. It can age without losing identity. It can move from living tree to human object and still keep the same inner character. So as this quiet journey comes to rest, cedar can remain where it belongs best now, not as a list of facts, but as a softened presence. A dark green tree against pale sky, a trunk marked by years, a board that still holds its fragrance, a room made gentler by warm grain and dry air, a memory arriving almost entirely through scent. Whether as a tree on a mountainside, a board that still holds its fragrance, or a memory carried almost entirely by scent, cedar remains one of those rare parts of the natural world that seems to stay with the mind long after the moment has passed.